It's my life, it's my heart, all the things I love.
Hello, my name is Letitia Davis, and welcome to Letitia's Heart, where you will experience all the things that I love: music, ministry, fashion, and life. We are on an assignment for the month of August talking about worship. What is worship? What does God think about worship? What is our responsibility when it comes to worship? Are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? What have we heard? What do we understand? What do we think? What do we give? Is God pleased? That's the real question. Is God pleased with anything that we do and in everything we do? Is God pleased? We aim to please so many people in life and forget the one person that it really matters to. The one person whose mind and whose heart and whose focus and whose opinion really matters. And that's God, our Father. Let's recap last week. We talked about the face or the person of worship. Who is it? We said God is the face and the person of worship. We understand that there is a standard for worship. He tells us spirit and in truth. So we're not just giving God what we want. We're not just giving God what we think or how we feel in that morning or on that day. That will not determine or should not determine our response in worship. It must be done in spirit and in truth. How do you know if you're a true worshiper? We said last week, when our worship reflects the face, when our worship reflects the name, when our worship reflects the image, the person of worship, which is God, it has to look like him. We use the example of conversion, foreign money, right? No matter what foreign money comes into the U.S., it needs to be converted in order for it to be used. It needs to be converted in order for it to have any weight or for it to have any use for that person while they're here. In the same way, we don't just come before God giving him what we want. Worship has to look like him. It has to reflect him. It has to mirror him, right? And the key that we gave last week was you must lose your name, but not your identity. Our names describe who we are. Our identity, it defines who we are, because when no one knows our name, we still are who God says we are. Now, let's get on with today's message, the expression of worship. I'm kind of excited about today because I was going in one vein, in one lane. I was going one way and the Lord kind of shifted me in another way. So we're going to start with what's important, what he wants. And so we're going to go right to Romans 12, verse 1. And it says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." This is your true and proper worship. What? Presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice. Now that alone is an oxymoron. How can I be a living sacrifice? Well, Paul tells us in Galatians 2:20, he says that we're crucified with Christ, nevertheless we live. Well, how is that? How are we crucified, but we still live? So it goes on to say, it's not us, but the Christ that now lives in us. So yes, we are alive. Yes, we are breathing, but we no longer live for ourselves. We die to ourselves. We die to our flesh, and we now allow the one who is on the inside of us, which is Christ, to live, to move, to speak, to lead us, to guide us, right? He is the one who orders our steps. We're no longer doing this thing in and of our own strength, in and of our own will, and not in our own way. We're leaning not to our own understanding, but in all of our ways, acknowledging him, and we're giving him permission. We're giving him the right of way to lead us and guide us. So one thing about God, everything he does, when we read this Bible, he is an intentional God. There is a why behind his what. He never does something just because. There are no oops. There are no what happened was. There's none of that when it comes to God. He's intentional about everything that he does. There is a why, an underlined reason. There is a motive, a method to his madness, even though it's not madness, it's goodness. But there is a foundation upon which he builds, that everything that God does, everything he implemented, everything that he tells us to do in this word should have momentum for growth, for advancement, for elevation. Nothing falls to the ground, not even his word, as the word tells us. And so everything behind God's what, there is a why. That is something that we are missing as believers. A lot of times, we talked about this last week, we do things, but it does not have a why. And today, as we talk about the expression of worship, it's important for us not just to go to the actions of worship. My expression, once again, lifting my hands, crying, all of these things that we do in a worship setting, but it still doesn't start there. I'm learning so much from my study and my time before God as I prepare for what he has instructed me to do as far as teaching on worship. I'm getting so much. So if this is only for me, then so be it. I receive it, Lord, as I'm learning, as he sends me back out to lead worship and then even to teach other leaders, to impart into other leaders. He's given me more of a foundation. We're not going to start with the song, right? Just as we have not here. So every expression has to be connected to a feeling, and that feeling is connected to a why. So expressions are connected to feelings. Feelings are connected to why. We see this example in John 3:16, familiar passage of scripture. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believed in him shall not perish, but will have everlasting life. The feeling was God so loved you and I. The expression was he gave. And his why was so we would have eternal life. Everything, remember, that God does has a why. Expressions are attached to feelings, and feelings are attached to a why. Feelings, when they have the why, and when they have expressions, I should say, when they have the feeling and when they have a why, they lead our bodies to now respond or to react to what we're feeling. That's when we lift our hands. There are expressions of worship that we are used to, that we are familiar with, that we are instructed or encouraged to do when we are in a church setting. We lifting our hands, we're kneeling, we bow, we shout, we sing, we move our feet, we dance, right? All of these are expressions, but it must be connected to a why. We know we have the feeling, you get excited. Anytime we get excited, we move. If you get, excited, and some people cry when they get excited, they're overwhelmed with emotion. But when in church, when we have these expressions of our bodies now being active participants in worship, when it lacks a why, we are now responding out of a place of emotionalism. I just got overwhelmed with emotion, so I did something. But it has no substance because it's not connected. Remember, expressions connected to feelings, feelings connected to the why. Or we could start with the why. Because of this, I express myself because I have a feeling attached to this why. Actually, the expressions, the feelings, and the why, they're all interchangeable. However, there has to be a why. There has to be a foundation. There has to be a start in order for us to build to where what we do and what we give pleases God. Not just man. And not just because we're doing something just to do it. Not because we're doing something just to look like everybody else. Not because we're doing something just to play the part or the role. It has to have substance, and substance is my why. Why? Because the why is life. The why is life. And who is life? Christ. We talked about this last week. John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So as we talked about the face and the standard of worship, which is it has to be done in spirit and truth. We said last week that spirit and truth is not only, it doesn't only reflect his name, but it is his name. He is spirit. And according to John 14:6, he is truth, but he's also life. So my why is connected to life. Life is Christ. Life requires the stability of our heart. And that is in everything that we do. In order for us to have life, it is connected, or it requires the stability of my heart, right? When your heart is broken, you're torn apart, you can't even think straight. We've all been there. Something has hurt us. Someone has hurt us. Some words were said that broke us, that shattered us. And now we don't want to get out of bed. Now we can't think. Now we can't eat. We're not functioning properly. Why? Because our heart is connected to our feeling, and our feeling is connected to our why. They said something negative. They walked away. I did not get the job. I got bad news. And so now all of this connects to how we act and how we respond. But according to the word, when things negative things happen to us, we should be responding a little different than the world does. That doesn't mean that we are in denial as to what is going on or what we're facing or what we're feeling, because he created us to feel. But our feelings should never dictate our response. There has to be a why. And why is life, and life is Christ. Life requires the stability of our heart in everything that we do. The Lord gave me this saying some years ago. He said, when you take He out of the heart of worship, all you're left with is the art. Now, I get amazed when the Lord gives me things and I write them down. You kind of think there's no significance to it. And then when you go back to it, it's like, whoa, God, only God can do it. Only God can do it. Only you can do that. Only you could give me that. When you take He, H-E, out of the heart, H-E-A-R-T of worship, all you're left with is A-R-T, the art. And the truth is, when we take Him out of anything that we say we have a heart for, anything that He's called us to, we're left with the art of it. Now, we know that art showcases and displays beauty, but there is no life to it. It lacks life. You can go to an art gallery and it speaks to you emotionally, but it can never speak to you audibly. It may give you a sense of happiness, or it may give you a sense of sadness, depending on the painting and the strokes and the colors and all of the things that go into a painting, but it does not have life. It's on display. It's beautiful. Someone's creativity went into it, or lack of creativity. But there is a why behind their what when they painted it. Whether they were happy, whether they were sad, whether they were going through something, whether they received some good news and it caused them to see or to think in a certain way that caused them to create strokes. Or, if you do art, you understand it all. And if you love art, you could appreciate what goes into it, even when you don't understand the why. But the why gives you so much more. It makes it so much more real to a person who's looking at it, who's viewing this piece of art. But art is just showcased. Art is beauty displayed, but it lacks life. In the same way, when we come presenting our expression of worship, but it lacks the why, it lacks life. It lacks Christ, right? Because we said they're all connected: expression, feeling, and the why. When there's a piece missing, when the why is missing, now we are operating and functioning in performance. We have now just gotten ourselves into performance. It's showcased, it's displayed, it's beautiful, but it lacks what it needs, which is Christ. It lacks the life. It lacks the why that is necessary and required for it to be your worship, my worship, to be accepted by God. I pray that you have viewed the last 2 weeks, the heart of worship and the face of worship, of the person of worship. But the underlying focus and the underlying message in them all is that Christ is the foundation and has to be the foundation before we go start being busy Christians, busy believers, active believers doing things that lacks a connection with Christ. Because he will not receive it. And woe to the person who stands before him on judgment day. And he says, all these things you did for me in my name, but depart from me, because I was never in any of it. You did it for show. You did it for yourself. You did it to please the people that you were around. You did it so that they could see you and think you were a wonder when I am the wonder. When we exercise learned behavior, we become desensitized and we stop growing in him. Oftentimes when you're a new believer and you start going to church, there are a lot of things that you do out of learned behavior. You see it done, you hear it, and so you respond to what you hear. Lift your hands, so I lift my hands. Worship, okay, what do you open your mouth and okay, let me open my mouth and worship. I don't really know what to say, but I'm gonna open my, come on, tell him you love him. And so now you learn, just as a child, you learn a behavior, you learn a response. But when we exercise learned behavior for too long, we become desensitized and we stop growing in him. Once again, this is all a part of the purpose of our walk, of our Christian faith, is that we continue to grow, excel, advance, not just in the workforce, not just on our jobs, not just in the business, not just with titles, not just with what is happening for us in life, but in our spiritual walk, in the kingdom. We want to continue to grow in him. When we practice learned behavior and we stop growing and we become desensitized, it's because we're now moving in memory. I know what to do. I've been taught, I understand it. There's things that we do in life without even thinking about it. Why? Because it's memory. And when we move in memory in the body of Christ, we will miss the glory. When we move in memory, a learned behavior, what comes natural, what I've been doing all these years, and I stop seeking the heart of God. I stop sitting before him to advance and to grow and to learn more, and for me to be developed, my spiritual walk, my mind, my understanding, the way I do and function in life. When all of that becomes, we plateau in that. When all of that comes, kind of we're still in it, we're stiff, we become stagnant in it. Now our memory that we're operating and functioning out of will cause us to miss the glory. Why? Because we have now boxed God in. We have now said, God, we are expecting you to do a new thing, but we're shackling you to yesterday. We have you handcuffed into what worked 10 years ago. We have you handcuffed to what we know will get us results, right? And if you did that back then, you have to still do it today. But is he a God that is moving and shifting and changing, and we want him and expect him to do new things for us? But what about what he wants to do in his own house? First, right here, I am the vessel, you are the vessel. I am the church, you are the church. If he can't first do it in us outside of the building, when we come inside the building, we talked about this last week, we will just be giving him something. If we don't continue to seek him and to pursue him personally, we will fail when we come together corporately to give him what we call worship. We talked about that last week. Anything that is a replica, it looks like it, but it lacks authenticity. And God is looking for authenticity in this hour. Today's key is this. In order for there to be movement, in order for the Spirit to have free reign and free, the ability to flow free in us, to use us how he wants to, it's going to require us to remain yielded to God in the flow of his Spirit. when it comes to the expression of worship. We're not just giving him lip service. We're not just giving him what we've been told or been instructed or encouraged to do. Those things are good, but those things are supposed to aid in you now moving forward and advancing. Why? Because you're going home and getting an understanding of why you do those things, of why God requires those things. When you do those things, what happens? Am I just lifting my hands? Am I just clapping my hands? Am I just shouting? Yes. Well, what happened in the Bible when Paul and Silas shouted when they praised? Oh, wait, prison doors opened with no key, with no physical guard pulling the gate or the door back? You mean my praise can cause prison walls, the prison walls of my life to open? It gives us much more meaning, and it's very encouraging when we realize how these things work, how they're supposed to work when we work them, but we must work the word to have an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. The why is important. When we perform, we engage with a partner outside of worship. I think it's troubling to even think of the amount of people who are in church that call or have an understanding of what they do and what they're giving God as a response when the word worship is used. It's crazy to think that a lot of that is performance, because it lacks a why. Not even because we're doing it on purpose, but the Bible tells us, in all thy getting, get an understanding. Why? Because you must know why you're doing it. You must know why he's asking and requiring it of you. If not, it becomes a routine. If not, it's just something that we do. And anything that we do that is not intentional, anything that we do and our heart is no longer in it, anything that we're doing, we have lost the passion for it. We're just robots in it. We don't want to lack the heart in anything that we do for God. Heart, life, Christ, the standard that he has established in his word for us as believers to live by and to walk by, to operate by, but to function by. It becomes our why. When the why is missing, when it comes to your expression, to my expression in worship, we have now become performers, and we are engaging with another partner, not in worship, outside of worship. And we know that anywhere that there's a connection, anywhere that there's a commitment, anywhere that there's an agreement, and that is broken in a marriage, we know what that's called. When you step out of marriage to do anything, to engage with someone else outside of that marriage, God is no longer pleased with your actions, because there's a covenant, there's an agreement, there's a connection that you have now made with that man or with that woman. In this walk with Christ, we have come into covenant. We have made an agreement. We have connected to him, and anything that we are doing in his name or using his name, but it's outside of him, he's not pleased with. He cannot agree with. Why? Because it does not reflect his name. So here is the question that the Lord is asking you and I today. How much of what we're doing is in the name or labeled worship, yet it has made no connection with God because we have not first presented ourselves, offered our bodies as living sacrifices that is pleasing to God? Because that's where it starts. Before you express yourself with your body, has your life, have you presented it? Have you offered it? Have you given it? Because once again, life is connected to Christ. Life is connected to Christ, and this is or should be our why. When life is missing, when Christ is missing, when the heart is missing, when my why is missing, now this is learned behavior. Now this is emotionalism. Now this is performance. Now this is just art, because Christ, he is missing. Anything disconnected from God will not be accepted by God. So remain yielded to God. That is my encouragement and my challenge to you today. Remain yielded. I pray this blessed you. It is blessing me. I hope that I got it out the way that I feel it, the way that I prepared it, the way that God gave it to me. If not, I pray that he will expand on what you don't understand, what you may not agree with. Maybe I didn't articulate it right. Whatever it is, put it before the Lord, as you should be doing with any word that is given to you. This is the expression of worship. Next week, we're going to talk about the sound of worship. And I have already been preparing that message. The Lord has already been giving me some nuggets. And the sound of worship, I'm going to dedicate to musicians. Now, I still want you to tune in and I still want you to be a part, but I'm going to dedicate it to musicians, because everything the Lord was giving me, I'm like, Lord, this is all about musicians. And so we're going to dedicate it next week's teaching to musicians, because they're often forgot about. The worship leader's sound is praised. The worship leader's sound is glorified, encouraged, and seen. But there is a sound that's coming from the instruments. But the ones that play the instrument, they get nobody's really thinking about them. Truth be told, in some churches, nobody even really knows them. But I want to encourage the musicians that your sound is necessary. Your sound is needed. Your sound is important. And before your sound can be effective here in the earth, your life must be submitted to Christ. So we're going to get into that next week. Look, the key is worship. Use your key. Be blessed.